Today we're going to talk about how to prune a rose tree, a lesson from Windy Willows Wholesale Nursery. The first thing we want to talk about is what tools you need. The first and most important is a good strong pair of gloves, thick enough to withstand the thorns from the roses. Ideally, the gloves should cover your forearms as well. Secondly, a good pair of loppers. The most critical thing about the loppers is that they should be sharp. The loppers will enable you to cut the thick stems of the roses. And lastly, we need a good pair of secateurs or pruners. The pruners should also be sharp. Make sure that there's a clean cut every time you cut back a section of the rose tree. Right, so here in front of us we have the rose tree that we're going to prune. You can see that the rose tree has grown too tall, that last year's pruning wasn't hugely successful. Our starting point is that we want to cut off the dry culms that emanate from the bottom of the rose bush. You can tell a dry culm by the color, and also if you scratch it, it doesn't show green. Cutting the culms off with the loppers is the easiest way. You could, if they're thinner, also cut them off with the pruners. So you'll see what I'm doing is identifying the dead culms from the center of the rose and trying to cut them without falling over. I've now cut the first two. Looking at the rose, I see another couple of dead stems coming from the base of the rose, which I want to remove as well. What I want to be left with are the two newer stems. So I've now cut off another dead culm, and finally this large one on the side, which was a dead piece, so it came off relatively easily. Step 2 in the pruning exercise is to cut the remaining canes on the rose tree to roughly knee height. At the end of the pruning session, the rose tree should be roughly 50 centimeters tall. If we look at the rose tree, we see that it grew too tall last year. A rose bush, particularly floribunda roses, should be between 1 meter and 1.5 meters tall and should have a distinct and rounded head. We are now going to start cutting the remaining green canes back to knee height. In cutting the remaining canes, the principle will be to ensure that the outward growing canes are the ones that remain. We will prune back all the canes that are growing inwards and leave those that are growing outwards. The reason is to ensure adequate airflow in the center of the rose. So for example, here we have two canes, one growing inwards and one outwards. We will prune back the one growing inwards and try not to get hit by the cane as it falls. If the cut is not clean, then use the secateur to clean it up. Moving on to the other side of the rose, we can see where the rose was pruned back last year. Since this juncture is roughly at knee height, we will cut back all the new growth to allow the rose tree to reshoot from the same point. We are now left with an outward growing cane at knee height with a number of protrusions. Looking at the next cane, we see that the juncture is a bit tall in this case. That is, it's above 1 meter. If we cut at this point, this will create a tall, spindly rose. So instead, we'll remove the cane altogether, allowing the rose to bush much lower down. Being a thick cane, we use the loppers to remove it. The last of our canes is this tall one at the back. We again cut this cane back at about knee height to ensure that the rose begins to bush at about 50 centimeters above the ground. Looking at our rose tree, we have 3 stems coming out from the base, one on each side and a third in the center. Removing this last cane, the central cane, will allow the rose to bush on the left and on the right, leaving plenty of air in the center. Again, if your loppers are not very sharp, which mine don't appear to be, then the cut will not be a clean one. I'm once again going to tidy the cut with a sharper pair of pruners. The last step in pruning the rose tree is to clean around at the base of the rose. Remove any shoots coming out of the base of the rose other than the 2 or 3 main stems that we wanted to leave on the rose. Cleaning away all of the dead leaves and the old cuttings at the base of the rose prevents any disease spreading to the rose tree. The base of the tree should always be kept clean. This completes the process of pruning the rose bush. This should be done either in late June or early July each year. This ends our rose pruning lesson from Windy Willows Wholesale Nursery.